Of course, when you were starting the interview, you spoke about legislation, because there are those people who would argue is it, way corporate, corporate governance in a company X or Y ultimately is affected by, the rule of law in any country. And of course, the two tend to impact, each other in a way or two. In a couple of, countries in this region, we've seen a bit of, weak governance, even in terms of keeping the rule of law. And I want to ask, would companies in such areas be able, to them have very strong, corporate governance, whereas the environments and the markets within which they work may not necessarily have such a strong regard for the rule of law?
Yeah, absolutely, and I think as a firm, for us coming to Africa, as a risk management firm, you can imagine that we have very strong values and ethics around things such as corruption and so on. And for us in Africa, we have a very, very strong policy that zero corruption. Wouldn't make sense as a risk management firm to do otherwise. And I think that illustrates what I believe in relation to legislation versus corporate governance and so on, that it has to come from people wanting to do the right thing. We can legislate, and that in many ways produces liability for, say, directors and so on, which maybe makes them listen a bit more. But at the end of the day, I think legislation can only go so far. It has to come from people wanting to do this, and the more people in Africa that say no, for example, to corruption, the more people that say we want risk management and do the right thing, it will slowly emanate through government, through private enterprise. And I believe in Africa it's not going to be so slow because of the passion I mentioned earlier. So I'm not a big fan of legislation. I think it's a backstop, it's a last resort. It really has to come from a cultural thing. And I guess my last point on that comes down to tone at the top. We always talk about an important aspect of any business is its culture, and we always talk about the tone at the top of the board. If we expand that out to the country, it comes from the tone at the top in terms of the politicians, of government, and everything flows down. And I think there's a huge responsibility of politicians, government, to make things happen underneath them, because we want to look up and have good role models of all of the things that we've spoken about.
You're mentioning about legislation, of course, being the last resort and being the last fallback plan. And I would imagine that, of course, you counter that possibly by showing people the benefits that they see it themselves without necessarily having the government with a big stick coming behind them. From the trainings you've been doing here, what's your feeling? Is that you've mentioned cultural change a couple of times? Is it beginning to happen, or has it already happened in the couple of organizations that you've been working with?
I think it's happening. We're not there yet because they're large organisations, and something like that takes a long time to flow through. But certainly the senior people that we are dealing with, the tone at the top, very much that they are embracing this. They want the change, they want risk management, they see the benefits of it, and that I'm sure will emanate through the organisation. Where we struggle is where we deal with maybe the more line management, and they look up to the board and the senior management who are not interested. Then they are really going to struggle. So I come back to that issue again, tone at the top, and yes, it is changing definitely.